Milford Haven, on the southwest coast of Wales, is a rias. It's a geological feature that is a flooded river valley. It was carved out south of the great ice sheets of the last glaciation that then flooded with the melting of those ice sheets and the rising of the seas, making it a natural deep water harbour that Admiral Nelson considered to be one of the greatest in the world, and only second to Trincomalee Harbour in Sri Lanka. The natural harbour has been used since at least Neolithic times, 5,000 years ago, as farmers colonised this part of Wales via the sea, building megalithic structures. And thousands of years later, the Iron Age Celts built earthen forts around the harbour, and later, Vikings used it as a haven, their memory retained in place names like Skoma and Stockholm Islands. When the Normans arrived to subdue the British, they built the castle at Pembroke in 1093. It resisted attacks over the following decades and centuries, and was expanded and further fortified. In the 13th century, it supported Edward's campaign against the Welsh princes. During the Owen Glendower Rebellion in 1400, it escaped attack again, with the constable of the castle paying off the rebels with gold. The castle and Milford Haven were staging posts for the invasion of Ireland. It was used as a base for several military operations that included Richard de Clare's invasion of Leinster in 1167, Henry II's invasion of Ireland 4 years later, John's continued subjugation of the Irish in the late 12th century, and Oliver Cromwell's 1649 invasion. Milford Haven saw the arrival in the Welsh Rebellion of French mercenaries in 1405, and it was perhaps a memory of this that Henry VIII, who established England's naval power and had the Royal Naval Dockyards at Portsmouth built in 1540, considered the main potential in Milford Haven was less naval base and more as a landing beach for invasion by France or Spain. And he initiated the construction of 2 turrets either side of the entrance, but these never amounted to anything. You can seek out the remains of the south side of one of these towers, although there is little to see. Britain's navy established itself as the dominant superpower, so new royal dockyards were built. From 17th to the 19th century, the naval dockyards were the largest industrial complex in Britain, with bases that included Portsmouth, the Thames Estuary and Plymouth. Being big business, the local lord and mainly absent landowner, Sir William Hamilton, wanted a piece of that considerable government investment. The first docks he developed were on the north side, at Milford, originally a whaling port complete with Quaker seamen from Nantucket. William encouraged the Navy to establish a royal dockyard, leading to an official report at the end of the 18th century that exaggerated the facilities of Milford Haven. Sir William was a British diplomat, antiquarian, archaeologist and volcanologist. After a short period of trying his hand as MP, he went on to become British ambassador to the Kingdom of Naples, where he served from 1764 to 1800. He studied the volcanoes Vesuvius and Etna and became a Fellow of the Royal Society. His second wife was Emma Hamilton, who was 26 when she married William, who was 60, and famed of course as Horatio Nelson's mistress. In the last years of William's life, the 3 of them shared a house. In 1800, the Royal Docks built its first frigate. Construction of ships continued for a few years, but the yard was moved to the southern shore in 1850, developing into Pembroke Docks. Milford Docks surviving and seeing a boom in fishing and related boat building. 2 artillery towers were constructed to protect Pembroke shipyard, although often referred to as Martello Towers, which some sources refute. Given the variety in designs, it's difficult to know what makes an artillery tower a Martello Tower. These towers were manned by a sergeant of artillery, who had his lodgings in the tower, and who was joined by his family, nothing new in working from home, and one presumes a pretty cushy job, given the threat of attack was non-existent. As a naval base and dockyard, it was also garrisoned, first by Marines aboard a grounded hulk, and then in specially constructed barracks. By the mid-19th century, a serviceman's lot had improved considerably, with improved laundry and dining facilities, and around 200 soldiers permanently garrisoned here. Over the 100 years up to the outbreak of the First World War, the shipyard built around 150 vessels. Although Pembroke Docks launched ships, as well as the Royal Yachts, the fitting and completion of the ships were often carried out elsewhere. After 1925, the docks continued to be owned by the military, with the Navy using Pembroke as a base. But the most important role was coastal defence. It became the largest operational base for flying boats. First in 1931 with the Southampton Mark II flying boat, and then followed by the Sunderland, or the Flying Porcupine, with 99 planes at its peak in World War II. The last Sunderland to fly from RAF Pembroke Dock was 1957. 2 hangars remain, the runway being Milford Haven. During the war, the hangars were camouflaged by painting them to look like terraced houses. A little bit of movie trivia. The full-scale Millennium Falcon built for The Empire Strikes Back was created in the Western hangar by Marcon Fabrications in 1979. The crew was sworn to secrecy, and the project was called The Magic Roundabout. On the 19th of August 1940, the 3 Junkers 88s flew up the Haven in daylight, attacking the Navy oil depot. Of the 17 tanks, 11 were destroyed. With the fire burning for 2 weeks, it required 650 firefighters from across the country to put out the blaze. 5 firefighters from Cardiff died. Throughout 1940 and 1941, attacks were frequent. In one, on May the 12th, 1941, 32 civilians were killed and 2,000 houses were damaged. It was the worst raid, and in total 40 civilians died in air raids during the war. Following the defeat of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1815, Britain was the global superpower. By 1860, France had gone from restored monarchy to partial democracy to return of empire, and Bonaparte's nephew seizing absolute control in 1852. Despite Britain's overwhelming military superiority, there was paranoia of invasion. A royal commission recommended an expensive coastal defence system of forts and gun emplacements around Britain's coastline. The cost was a staggering £12 million for the building work and another £5 million for the artillery. In today's money, that would be £20 billion. The defences were named Palmerston Forts after the Prime Minister, who was supportive of the venture, although they became better known as Palmerston Follies. It turned out that Napoleon Bonaparte III was more interested in modernising France than invading neighbours, although the war with Prussia in 1870 did see the Second Empire's demise, and it was replaced by the Third Republic, that in turn pursued colonisation in Africa and the Far East rather than fight European wars. Construction of the forts was grand, to say the least, and extensive. There were dozens built across Britain, with 11 for Milford Haven alone, including St Catherine's Fort at Tenby. Although some of the forts at Milford Haven were already under construction a few years before the Commission presented their grand plan. Fort Hubberston, next to the town of Milford, had a battery of 19 guns and the barracks to house 250 personnel. Although there appears to be issues actually finding recruits, it was occupied during the First World War, but abandoned afterwards, and served as barracks for US soldiers in preparation for D-Day. Plans to repurpose the fort, such as converting it to housing, have come to nothing, the current owner announcing in 2020 that it would become a living ruin. As you can see from the graffiti, there's not a lot of security, and it's frequently explored. There is, however, a number of non-fatal injuries occurring over the years. And it is a great example of the problem for society finding a use for a large listed historical building. What do you do with such a structure? The Thorne Island Fort was converted into a hotel after the Second World War, changing owners on a couple of occasions. In 2016, you could buy it for £500,000, the price of a terraced house in a smart part of London, and there's been recent plans to build a cable car to get guests to and from the island. There also appears to be some renovation work going on at the moment. Again, the fort actually predates the Palmerston Fort building project by a few years, being constructed in 1854. But it was upgraded with 5 modern 7-inch Armstrong guns to go alongside the dated 68-pounders so as to intercept fast-moving steamers. In 1878, the cargo ship, the Loch ran aground on the rocks with a shipment of whisky, among other things, creating Wales's own whisky galore. 2 locals died trying to liberate the cargo, and another died from alcohol poisoning. Visible on Google Maps as a hexagon-shaped woodland, Fort Scoverston was to provide landward defence. Buried in the thicket are ramparts, gun emplacements and barracks. It is on private land, and urban exploring is discouraged. Popton Fort, which is opposite Milford's Haven Fort to provide full inner line defence, was abandoned after the First World War, used again in the Second, and then sold to BP. It's now a security headquarters for the Angleby refinery. Although private property, security seemed unfazed by my interest. Delfort, overlooking the picturesque harbour at Dale, was converted into a private home after the Second World War and is now a field study centre. Chapel Bay Fort near Angle, being repurposed in 2015 as a museum, one of the fort's original 10-inch guns has been remounted as part of the restoration. East Block Battery is not particularly impressive. The barracks now a private home. The ruins of Henry's Tower is just visible, and the concrete structures on the cliff are searchlight positions dating from the Second World War. West Blockhouse Fort is the best preserved, being restored in 1969 by the Landmark Trust. It's a holiday let. It was used right up to 1956, when all the coastal artillery defences across Britain were finally abandoned. During the Second World War, it served as a headquarters for the Spotlight teams. If you want a holiday with up to 8 people and dogs are welcome, the cost varies from £1,000 to £2,000 for 3 nights South catering, depending on the season. Just above is the concrete battery built in 1907. A similar battery is found on the east, although less accessible. These towers are leading lights. When a ship lines up the 3 lights, they know they are on the correct passage to enter the harbour. Now they bristle with electronic navigation aids. These forts are a memorial to superpower paranoia. Britain was not going to be threatened by France, and the Royal Navy was so powerful there was never a threat of invasion, but it seems being the greatest came with doubt. You can see it in the literature at the time. Dracula was about insidious invasion. The War of the Worlds was the idea that somewhere there was a more powerful enemy than any found on Earth. In 1871, Lieutenant Colonel George Tompkins Chesney caused uproar with an anonymous publication in Blackwood's magazine, and the story was the Battle of Dorking. Chesney believed Great Britain was unprepared for armed invasion from Germany, especially after its victory in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. The story is told in retrospect from 50 years into the future, which has its own irony, when a soldier recounts to his grandson the terrible events. Using a powerful new weapon called the fatal engines, the German Navy destroys the British fleet. They march on London, and the final battle is at Dorking in the Surrey Hills. The British are defeated, and Germany takes control of Britain, and the Empire is disbanded. The reaction to the story was immediate. The British, having grown complacent with their military superiority, were horrified. It led to the British government reassuring the public that plans to review the army were already in hand. The story was such a hit, sequels followed, and this paranoia has been repeated in our own time with the current global superpower, whose military is so powerful they still spent a staggering $70 billion on the Raptor fighter aircraft. That's about $350 million for each plane, where there are no competitors, and there's no power that can compete with the existing Air Force. Visit the Victorian forts around Britain, and they are as much a memorial to the nation's engineering skills and global status as a reminder that being top dog comes with a cost. A little further up from the West Blockhouse is St Anne's Head Lighthouse, built in 1844, and there's a Coast Guard lookout, as well as spectacular cliffs and views. There is a complete coastal walk around the entirety of Wales, and the Pembrokeshire coast is well worth a visit. So I hope you enjoyed exploring this corner of Wales, and please like, comment and subscribe.